Walking tall down the hall, too high to fall. How about y'all? This is D Infinity Live. I'm your host, William Big T Thrasher. With me, as always, is our other host, Michael Jolly Varhola. And joining us live on the air for the very first time, friend of the show, Richard Penwarden. Hey, Richard.
Good evening.
Welcome, Richard.
Yeah, and this once again, you are. I guess you would be our third international guest.
Yeah, I guess I would. I don't know. I haven't counted.
Well, no, we've had more international guests. We have had Chris Van Deelen from Canada, and I think once he was on the show, actually, well, he was in the Philippines, so he counts as two international guests. Clint Staples is from Canada, and Heath is from Australia, so that makes Richard our fourth international guest.
Oh, right. Well, good significant number. Well, anyway, tonight on D Infinity Live, your multi-platform, multi-publisher gaming supplement, we are going to be taking a look at power gaming. But before we get into that, we've got a lot of things to talk about. First and foremost, if you're a reader of our website, d-infinity.net, there has been a lot going on our website this week. Specifically, just today, we have three fantastic RuneQuest articles from Clint Staples. The first two are RuneQuest conversions of two of my nuisances spells, the Clown Shoe Curse and the Cork Bat. But he's also got a new. He's also started doing Mythos Society Guide to New England bonus content that's compatible with the RuneQuest system. In fact, just a few hours ago, he uploaded for his RuneQuest Thursday article the Mythos Society Guide to New England bonus monster, the Demonic Horse, for RuneQuest. It's a demonic horse that haunts the battlefields of around New England.
Yep. Yeah, he's a machine. He has cranked out some good material. The RuneQuest stuff, bonus material in Call of Cthulhu format, which is similar to RuneQuest, for his popular Mythos Society Guide to New England, and stuff for the Bash superhero system. So he has really helped us to expand the number of game systems that we're supporting with D-Infinity Online.
And that's just game content related articles. We've also got a new blog post by Chris Van Deelen. We've got a new medical post by our staff physician Eric Lees about kidney stones. And then we've also got part 2 of my serialized swords and sorcery fiction, Ill Met in the Necropolis,
which I have yet to read and am very much looking forward to. I mean, the name is very evocative of a title from a Fritz Leiber Rogues of Lankmar story, isn't it?
Pretty heavily influenced by the work of Fritz Leiber and the Fafhrd and Grey Mauser story, so the title is a tribute to that.
Yeah, and actually the whole Swords of Coast Fantasy campaign setting and our fiction line, that's a tribute to Fritz Leiber too, because all those Fafhrd and Grey Mauser books were things like Swords Against Deviltry, Swords in the Mist, so we really tapped into that for everything we're doing. So, good stuff.
Indeed. And Mike, what has been going on this week with our co-publisher Skirmisher?
There are a lot of fun and exciting things going on. Normally I get to just talk about whatever we just came out with during the week, but we haven't come out with anything this week, and we actually deliberately decided not to. The reason we decided not to come out with anything new is because we've really been trying to get out the word about our Giving Thanks and Giving Back annual sale. So the sale runs until Monday, and everything on the Skirmisher, everything of Skirmishers on the Drive-Thru RPG and RPG Now sites and their affiliated sites is 33% off. So right now, until Monday, everything, our entire product line is 33% off, 1/3 off for anyone who's interested in picking up anything. So that's something that's going on, and if somebody's had their eye on something, now is the perfect time to get it. Something else that's going on is that we are about to release our first foreign language release, foreign language for English speakers, relative to English speakers. We are releasing Your Scenario for Cthulhu Live, Sight Unseen, and we are releasing it as Der Leere Blick, and it is going to be the German language edition, hopefully just the first of many products of ours that have been translated into German, and that is going to be available through DriveThruRPG as of Tuesday. And we've got some cool audio files that tie in with it that we're going to make available at D-Infinity Online. So that's something that's going on. And then the last thing is we have got 2 books on the hottest small press list at DriveThruRPG right now. One is your Will's 100 Oddities for a Creepy Old House, and the other is Wisdom from the Wastelands, issue number 47, Underwater Rules. Those are both on the hottest small press list, and then 100 Oddities for a Creepy Old House is on the hottest titles list for DriveThruRPG, which is an even bigger and more impressive list. So those are our titles I'd encourage people to take a look at. Wisdom from the Wastelands, issue number 47, and your 100 Oddities for a Creepy Old House, which is our #1 publication right now.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that, although I can't take full credit, Micah. You contributed to that, and Clint Staples also contributed heavily to that book.
But I did not contribute heavily to it, so I will not pretend that I did. I think you and Clint did the majority of the work on it. But it's a great book. People are having a lot of fun with it. And it's only, with our sale, it's only 66 cents right now. So people can I mean, what if it sucked? What if you lost? 66 cents. And it doesn't suck. It's a terrific book.
If you don't buy it, you're losing money. That's the kind of value we're talking about.
Money away. You might as well just go flush money down the toilet if you're not going to buy this book.
It's 100 things you wouldn't put in a haunted house if you don't like it.
That's right. And even though we've marked it down from 100 cents to 66 cents, we don't get rid of 34 of the items. All of them are still in there. So the price is reduced, the number of items is not.
Excellent. All right, well, Richard, before we get into our topic of power gaming, would you like to introduce yourself more formally to our audience?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And give your background as a gamer, how far back your pedigree as a gamer goes, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so, gosh, this thing. So I've been gaming for about 27 odd years now. Came into it from, well, actually, my route into role-playing games was quite different to a lot of people's. You get people that come from wargaming background, and more recently you get them coming from the computer games, PlayStation, Xbox. But
right.
My route was actually from the game books, like the solitaire adventures, where you turn to this number or you turn to that number if you want to go left or right. Mm-hmm. Things like Lone Wolf and Fighting Fantasy. Basically because I live in rural Cornwall in southwest England, and there wasn't that many gaming groups and things to join, so we used to read these game books, and then that progressed on to Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. So that's pretty much where I've come from.
Well, those game books are still pretty popular. There are a number of publishers that have actually just recently started doing choose your own adventure books. Yes. There is a series that it's being launched by some of our friends. Ernie Gygax, who's been on the show, yeah. And Benoit Poiret, who's Canadian, and he's been on the show. And their GP Adventures is getting ready. That's their company, GP Adventures, Gygax Poiret Adventures. They're getting ready to launch the Crossroads to Adventure series, which is significant to me because it has the most sophisticated rules set associated with it of any of the choose your own adventure books I've ever seen. I think the rules a lot of times used to be a little too rudimentary, and they've done a really, really, really nice job with it. So yeah, those things are still popular, and maybe they're going to keep bringing people into gaming. But that's it. I came from wargaming, so yeah, like you said, that's the more traditional route.
They're sort of coming through a bit of a renaissance at the moment with the game books, so yeah, I expect to see more things in the future.
Yep. Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right, well, gentlemen, our topic tonight is power gaming. And I guess we'll just, before we get into our questions and comments from the audience, we'll just go ahead and get around the room and just give our general thoughts on power gaming. I've got to say, my own thoughts on power gaming have really mellowed over the years. When I first got into role-playing games, specifically running role-playing games in the early 90s, I was kind of very dead set against power gaming and would take ridiculous precautions to try to prevent it from polluting the game I was trying to run. But having played with so many more people in there, there are actually some sort of I guess for lack of a better term, styles of power gaming that I actually kind of like. And I realize that it's not power gaming that I don't like as a GM. It's jerks. And like the same toolbox you use to power game in the hands of a really awesome player does not hurt the roleplay experience at all. But the toolbox of power gaming in the hands of a jerk can make that one of the worst players you will ever interact with as a GM or a player.
Okay, before Richard and I give our attitudes toward power gaming, why don't we expand the question a little bit, or expand the answer, and have you give us your definition of power gaming?
Well, I suppose when it comes down to it, my basic definition of power gaming is gaming in such a way that you are trying to optimize both the character and its role within the game.
Got it.
Typically, this is in terms of the rules, but there are a handful of people I've run games for who I would consider sort of setting-based power gamers, where they use just their knowledge of the lore of the setting to optimize their character as opposed to the numbers on paper.
Oh, yeah.
But how would you define that, Mike?
Probably pretty much like you did. But for me, I'd say there's a fine line between optimization and power gaming. And optimization does not have a pejorative meaning to me. That means, playing efficiently and looking at the way that the game is configured, and within the context of the game, fairly and legitimately creating a character that's as good as it can be within the context of the rules. So I don't have a problem with people doing that. I would say my definition of power gaming goes beyond that, to people who are trying to abuse or twist the rules, to find gray area things where they can abuse the spirit of the rules. So for me, optimization.
Have you read my answer?
What's that?
Have you read my answer?
We'll let you go ahead of me next time. So that's what I would say. There's a fine line between optimization and power gaming, and I don't have a problem with the one, and I do have a problem with the other, because it usually involves someone who's being abusive and usually someone who is abusive in the context of the game anyway. So this is a personality type as much as anything, as you referred to, Will. Richard, do you have any answer left? Or we get all the good ones
probably
now?
got something somewhere. Yeah, it is, like you say, you're taking the game almost to the limit, and you're testing those limits, and you're literally trying to wring every last drop of advantage out of it, whether that's a combination of character skills or items or a combination of all of it together. I guess it's for gamers, they don't quite get it. They think they know how to play because they're obviously doing it right because it works. But they're losing something at the same time. They're losing some of the spirit of the game.
Well, and you know what? I would say that sometimes the power gaming, the getting the most out of the game, as we've all said, sometimes it actually has the opposite effect. And let me give an example. Sometimes if I've got a really, really fiendish trap, for example, or a really complicated item that needs to be created, then I want the players to power game. Then I want them to use to help each other and get every little +1 or +2 bonus that they can to really increase the chance that they're going to succeed at what they're doing. But they're thinking about that and they're working together, so it's a collective power gaming thing. And I don't mind it under those conditions. If they're doing it under those conditions, then the players are reading me right. They're reading me right, which means we're collectively telling the story together. But where I hate it is where I just want to get through a scene and move on to something else, and I'm going to just let the characters succeed, or something is already foreordained, and they just want to beat to death some kind of thing where they're trying to get an advantage, and they don't need that advantage, and they're pissing me off, and they're bogging down the game. So the whole idea that they're gaining something is actually failed. They've actually failed at that, because whatever they gain is completely tainted by the fact that they didn't need to gain it, and they've irritated me and possibly other people at the table.
Yeah, I think that is, as always, what we're looking for. It's only a problem so much as it damages the game, it damages someone's playing experience, and oftentimes you can kind of damage your own playing experience when you're munchkinning your character. I run a lot of between Call of Cthulhu and World of Darkness. I run a lot of investigation-based urban fantasy games, and that's one thing I've noticed is I can say this is going to be a heavily investigation-based game, and then a player builds a character that is optimized for combat. That's fantastic, but I may only intentionally include one combat-based scene in the game, and because you didn't put any points into any investigative skills, well, now you can't investigate because you've optimized in a very specific area.
Right. And that I don't necessarily mind in and of itself, because the player has made a choice in that case to be better at some things than others. So the character who has armor that's stripped down so that he won't drown when he's in water, and he's maximized his swim skill, well, he's not going to be as good in the desert, and that's just fine, because he's going to be the one that really shines when he's in an aquatic environment. So knowing that there's a trade-off. Once again, for me, it just comes down to attitude. If it's harming the integrity of the game, the fact that it actually can impede a character under certain circumstances, that's all right. I live in the real world, and my personality traits impede me under certain circumstances all the time. That's just the way things work.
Well, how can that be? You're jolly.
Sometimes being jolly isn't enough, or it irritates people who aren't as jovial as I am.
Oh, no, Richard, you've often referred to yourself as a former power gamer. Could you talk about that? Could you talk about what changed in your play style?
Yeah, I suppose, like you say, it's actually the group of players that you play with. When I was younger, going through school and that, a lot of the players that I would play with, like you say, you would play this way. This is what you need to do. You need. There was a period when I was doing a second edition, and every group I played with, if there was a dwarf or a halfling in it, every single one was a fighter thief. It was never just a fighter, and it was never just a thief.
Right.
I don't know. The game wasn't particularly broken or anything. There was no particular advantage. It's just that it's what everybody wanted to play. And the problem with that is it sort of creates a trope. So the characters are like adventuring, and you'll see a non-player character party. If you see a dwarf in it, what you're going to think the dwarf is? You're going to think he's a fighter thief or something like that, and you're going to set up your tactics and that to cope with that. And it does. It sucks a lot of the fun out of it.
Yeah.
So I like it when you'll see a dwarf that he's not a dwarf fighter thief or anything like that. He's something completely different, like a bard or something else like that.
Well, it makes the game feel less. Oh, I wasn't waving at you, Richard. I was waving at Carol Boss. I wasn't cutting in. I wasn't cutting in. I was just saying hello to one of our listeners who's responding right now, our viewers. What you're saying is absolutely correct, though. It makes the game feel less organic. And I think that's the nice thing about a role-playing game, that you really can give somebody on some level the sense that they're operating in a real world, in a real fantasy world. And once you've reduced it, to the number of options that you would have on a chessboard as far as character types go, that makes it a lot less interesting, a lot less organic, much less believable as a real setting. Much more predictable, much more controllable, like you're saying.
Yeah, and that's actually where some game systems can kind of encourage a certain high level of background power gaming. Certain game systems sort of encourage a certain kind of optimization, like you talked about, halflings always being fighter thieves. I know in most fantasy games I'm playing, if someone plays a character of a non-human race, they will almost always be of the class that's stereotypically associated with that race. Not And not even because that necessarily makes that character more powerful, but because the way the game is balanced, if you make a character of that race that isn't from the stereotypically associated class, on paper, that character, rules-wise, does end up looking very mediocre.
Well, and this is actually one of the fun things that as game developers we can do. As far as power gaming goes, in some ways I'm debatably worse or better than a typical power gamer, because if I want something to function a certain way, I'll just write a new rule for it, and I'll publish the damn thing. I'll actually make it look official. I'll actually publish an official licensed rule for a game system. So I guess where I stray into power gaming is where I go beyond optimization, and I don't even know if it's power gaming. It's more just trying to fulfill a vision. I want to do something that can't be done with the rules, so I create a new rule for that. So what's the most powerful dwarf class, say, in the games that I run? And it doesn't have to be this way in everyone's game. It's characters that are paired with the combat engineer prestige class. So our dwarves are good at building things and tearing things down, and we created a combat engineer prestige class. So that turns up with a lot of dwarves, paired with fighter or paired with rogue or paired with something else, and that really sort of informs the kinds of things they can do as a combat engineer. As far as halflings go, a disproportionate of my halflings are multi-classed as prostitutes. So I don't know why I go to that every time, but so you're right. They look mediocre if you're going with the rules as written. I think that's, like I said, I don't know if it's a positive tendency on my part or a power gaming tendency, but I really try to redefine a lot of those races in other ways by creating new feats or new subtypes or new prestige classes to really let them shine in different ways, more distinct ways.
Yeah, you can do that with the ability scores as well, can't you? Because, like, for instance, take if you had a halfling thief, obviously they're going to have a high dexterity score, aren't they?
Right.
Well, if you're using a point-buy system or something like that, you're going to maximize that as much as you can, and you can probably work out which of the scores that they haven't put quite so many points in. Like, it might be charisma, the dump stat, or something like that. So you might tailor your character on that assumption and think, well, I'm going to make sure that I can cast this spell that is a save versus charisma or something like that, because I know most of the halflings I'm going to come up against aren't going to be able to save against it, or strength, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Although we did get a nice comment from viewer Shane Allen, who says, actually, that's one thing I enjoy a lot is playing against type. And I got to say, I actually agree with that. There is something very enjoyable about intentionally making a character that breaks with that tradition, but not necessarily in a radical way. That was something I always used to draw these amazed looks from when I used to play Mage of the Ascension. Back when I was running and playing Mage of the Ascension, everybody took at least 2 dots of Prime, which... I'm not going to explain the metaphysics of the game. The only reason anybody ever took that is just having that let you do massive amounts of damage with any kind of magic. And that's the whole reason really anybody had it. But I would always make characters that didn't have that. 1, because I felt my points were better spent in other areas, and 2, well, everybody already has that, so I'm not bringing anything extra to the party if I take that ability. And yet it would always happen. What? You don't have Prime too? As if that one thing is going to somehow end the world.
I tend to agree with you. Breaking from type is good if you can do it in a way, in my opinion, that once again makes it feel organic. Where somebody sees that you've broken from type and says, "Oh, actually that makes sense. That's clever. That's a very clever way to break from type." I'm less impressed with it when it's something that's just sort of the opposite of what you would expect. So, we had in one of our games the halfling barbarian gladiator. Okay, it's not that you couldn't have one, and it's kind of cute, but it was just a little too much. It was just a little too polarized from what you would expect a halfling to be. Taking this sort of cute halfling thing and making it sordid or shady. Kafka used to write about these weird little creatures in his stories, and he said, are they hag-like children or childlike hags? And that's sort of my halflings. Are my halflings, childlike hags or hag-like children? Which are they? So that's how I like to break from type, by having them be people. They're actually little people. They're not just little childlike people. They're creepy little people that have childlike characteristics. So I think breaking from type by 3 degrees or 15 degrees rather than 180 degrees is actually more interesting and ultimately fun and believable.
Less is more.
Oh, absolutely. All right, now, viewer Bryce Whitaker has a comment. Says, I think there's a motivational aspect that's important to this discussion. Why are you power gaming? Let us say, in my experience, generally, I've kind of come across 3 different kinds of power gamers. I've come across the type of power gamer where they just enjoy the act of optimization. They have a lot of fun going through the rule books and finding interesting ways to combine things to get as many bonuses on the character as possible. And they see it as just kind of a fun little challenge. They don't do it to wreck games. They don't do it to overshadow players. Although sometimes that can happen, but they do it because they legitimately enjoy the challenge of optimizing their character.
And just to butt in before you give your other 2 examples, that's not necessarily bad. That's the kind of thing that allows a 3.0 version of a game to get re-released as a 3.5 version that has a lot of the broken elements taken out. So that's actually testing the limits of the game. That actually has a real viable positive purpose.
Oh, yeah, and I've definitely seen people do it, again, because they also like to come up against those limits and test those limits. Then the second group, which can be a problem, is the people who optimize their character in power game because they're always expecting at some point to get screwed over by the GM or another player at the table. So they are trying to build a character that cannot be screwed with in some way, which... And a lot of times I've seen that happen because they have played with GMs that will screw them over. I don't like to be that GM, so sometimes it can be frustrating with me. He's like, no, you don't need to just maximize all your will saves. I'm not going to be constantly having liches mind control you. Just build a fun character. And that can bleed over into the game in some destructive ways, only because if they're building their character based out of this paranoia, then they're going to play the character based out of that paranoia, and it can mess up the party dynamic. It can kind of mess up the way the character interacts with the world, because they might be able to overcome any challenge I throw at them, but they're not going to accept that challenge because they're assuming it's just me laying a trap. And then finally, the third group are just assholes who want to break your game.
Right.
I
would say the first group is not a bad group, as noted. I'd say the second group has been created to some extent, maybe not by the DM who's running that game, but by the player's experience with previous DMs. So it's on the DM to sort of prevent that from happening. And the way we handle it in skirmisher games and our official playtest games is we hand you your character at the beginning of the game. It's that simple. We've come up with the character. And that actually, believe it or not, encourages role-playing a lot more than you would think, because the player then gets to put their own imprint on that character, and they don't have to get bogged down worrying about optimizing things. They optimize the way they play, not the way the character is as it's handed to them.
Yeah, I think you're right. It can be a bit of a cop-out, actually. If they're not sure how to role-play their way out of the situation, they'll try and power game their way out of the situation. Brilliant example. When you did your Halloween Cthulhu, I can't remember, Scarefest, whatever it was you called it. That's the one. Brendan's character at one point loses his gun, I think it is, and he decides, I'm going to go and use the toilet plunger as a weapon. Now, if he was more of a power gamer, he could have grabbed a chair and used it like a club, or he could have gone down to the basement and grabbed some tools or something like anything like that. That's what a power gamer would do, because you're not going to do any damage at all with the plunger.
Right.
But the great thing was, he did it. He entered into the spirit of the game, brought up something fun and entertaining, and the game just flowed onwards. And that was brilliant.
Yeah, good
But
point.
it's because he's such a good role player, he was able to think of a role playing solution. So sometimes it's almost like a power gamer is scared to try and risk a role playing way out of the situation. So they'll fall back on a tried and tested mathematical method that this is going to work because I've got invulnerability to that, or the
Yeah.
chances are I'm not going to lose that many hit points against this guy, so we'll do that.
That's a good point, and that's not how people think in real life. Generally, I mean, that's not how I think. I guess there probably are some people who think that way. Yeah, and and once again, that's the kind of thing that DMs can really help offset.
I'd reward my players if they were trying to do that sort of thing rather than hack their way out of every situation. I'd give
Well,
them
exactly.
the benefit of the doubt. I wouldn't make it too easy for them, but
Right.
I'd help them out.
Stuff goes wrong in real life when it isn't a combat situation, and stuff really goes wrong in real life when it is a combat situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when I'm running a game, if we're using miniatures, assuming we don't have a grid where you can just eyeball stuff, I don't let players measure stuff. They have to just kind of figure it out. Sometimes spells land short, or sometimes they go over.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, is it 220 feet away or 221 feet away? I get a -2 penalty if it's 221 feet away. You don't know. And if they try to jerk me around on that, I'm just going to give them the -2 no matter what. Because it really goes contrary to the spirit of the game. If you're an archer, you're going to line up your shot. You're going to do the best you can. You're going to get a sense that it's a little further away than might be optimum. But you're not going to. I don't like when people get too meta. That's the problem with power gamers. They drag a meta element into the game that damages the believability of the situation. They erode the believability by always thinking in terms of numbers rather than in terms of what they're going to do. It is. I guess that's where it comes down. It's not optimization. It's where it becomes contrary to the concept of role playing.
There was something you said a short while back about heroes in literature, and it was even someone like you said, Conan the Barbarian walking through a darkened alley. If someone comes at him with a knife, if you're playing D&D, you're thinking, okay, well, it's about D4 plus maybe his strength modifier plus this. Conan's level 20 barbarian. Is he going to worry about a knife stabbing him in the back? Right. No, he isn't. But when you read the stories, every time Conan is going to be a little bit concerned. He's not just going to shrug it off. He's going to fight back.
And how many times has a drunken Conan been hit over the back of the head with a flagon of wine and wakes up, in a ship or in a dungeon? So it didn't really matter what level he was. That was still something. He still had to deal with the vicissitudes of the world. Well, that's where game mechanics can sometimes vary from the literary or reality quality of a game. So once again, it's up to the GM to sort of mesh those things.
Yeah, which actually is something I very often do. Is any game I run, if it's a game that's modeled after a particular type of literature or a particular type of filmmaking or a particular style of storytelling, I always implement a bundle of house rules that make it feel more like with your Conan example. Almost every game I do, I'll flat out say, if you want to knock someone out for a devious purpose, that is always easier than having a full-on fight with them.
Right.
So, if all you want to do is go through this guy's pockets, don't waste time doing 5 rounds of combat. Just tell me you want to hit him on the back of the head and knock him out. We can resolve that in one roll.
Yeah, I think one player type, and I think this ties in with the whole power gamer type, is it's the player that tries to keep secrets from the DM. Well, we're going to go over here and we're going to discuss this because we don't want the DM to know what's going on. We're not playing against each other, guys. If someone keeps things I'm never trying to screw over the players. If they keep something from me and they keep it a secret, I'm going to find out eventually, and then it just is going to have cost that much time before I can adjudicate whatever they want to do. So I'm not there as God. I'm not there as an antagonist. I'm there as sort of the rules of reality. and the more of what they're doing that I can absorb in real time, the more I can make good decisions on what they're trying to do.
It's not canon unless you, as the GM, know what's going on.
I mean, I remember in high school, and of course, high school is the exception to the rule because that's where you deal with your biggest jerk players. But there was one player who would come to a game, and he would have a list of possessions that he would not show to the GM, and he'd say, "Well, the GM doesn't know that I have these things. I'll bring them out when I'm ready to." And of course, it was this basically the inventory of everything from S3 Journey to the Barrier Peaks.
Well, related to that, this is a few years ago, I was running a campaign, and there was a lot of sort of secret note passing that went on between myself and the players, and even between some of the players, because that game got very paranoid. There was one particular session, one of the players had written something down on an index card and showed it to another player, but then folded that index card and put it down in front of her. And I just assumed it was another secret note. But 3 hours later, this thing is going on in the game, and then she passes me the note and says, "This is what my character has been doing for the past 5 days." And it was like, this had apparently for 5 days, without telling me, had been working this elaborate ritual that would take care of the problem that they had finally found themselves in.
You don't tell the DM it didn't happen.
Well, yeah, and I did bring up a comment like, well, how if you were doing this, what were you doing all the other times you were interacting with?
How did you notice that you were doing it?
Your concentration got broken.
Well, the whole idea that you can write a note and just put it in front of you, and that somehow declares your intent. I mean, you could create a game where that was a mechanic. That would be fine. But it doesn't make any more sense to do it in D&D than it does in Risk. Ooh, I didn't really lose. Here's a list of all the things I did while you were playing.
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't anything that I was going to say no to. It was nothing that I was going to try to rearrange the game to make unsuccessful. It's nothing that I would have done anything to interfere with had I known.
There's nothing wrong with surprising the DM, but the whole idea that somehow you can surprise the DM and manipulate them or force their hand, this I think is what's misguided.
Oh, and we had and I'm glad my friend Michelle Yunker made this post, and I'm glad she did. The one game where everything is overpowered is Rifts, and that's something I really am glad was brought up. Games that are in and of themselves over the top power fantasies. What does power gaming mean in a game where everything is cranked up to 11, where you start out the game playing a demigod?
So how can you power game it then?
Well, it really depends on the game. I mean, like, Rifts is such an amazingly anarchic, crazy game that I find it very difficult. In my experience, I found that to be very difficult for people to power game simply because it's so big, so out there, and so crazy. And I don't think that's bad in the design. I just think it's very chaotically designed. In a lot of ways, that's to that game's benefit. But then in other games like Exalted, which are ridiculously over the top, but also very tightly designed, because of the way everything in that game scales, even though you're playing a demigod in a party of demigods, it is still possible to power game, and often to such a way that it invalidates the involvement of all the other players. I may have told the story before. It was an Exalted game that my brother was in where it was just these 5 warriors against an army of hundreds, and they were going to make a valiant last stand. Everybody was getting their powers ready. The army starts charging at them. And one guy, because this is the way his power worked, fired one arrow into the air, and 1,000 arrows came raining down and just destroyed the entire other army before anyone else got to do anything in that fight. And it drained all the tension and all the drama out of that scene.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's on the GM to try to not allow something to wreck the game like that. I guess what I would say with regard to Rifts or any other system is that some games are mechanically set up to encourage power gaming more than others to their own detriment. So let me give an example. Original first edition D&D, that encouraged power gaming because if you had, say, 15 as your highest score, and then a 14, a 13, a 12, 11, and a 10. Let's say that was your score array. You had in first edition D&D what many people would consider to be an unplayable character. You had no bonuses whatsoever with a character with those scores. But then when D&D became a D20 based game, or it became, the D20 system, dictated by the D20 system, a character with those exact same scores had plus 6 or 7 worth of bonuses and actually was a very viable playable character. So the mechanics of the game itself did not encourage power gaming to the same extent. It actually allowed you to have a playable character that was still believable and realistic and balanced with the other characters in the party. Whereas in first edition D&D, you always had somebody who had to have the 1800 strength because he felt that was the only way he could compete. And in that rule system, no matter what, a human couldn't go over a certain strength score. So the game was really forced people to try to power game in a sense. Whereas in the newer edition of the game, that was minimized. So I think the mechanics of the game have a lot to do with whether people are encouraged to power game or not.
And the NPCs in that as well, of course. If the players know the supplements and they see how the NPCs are created, right. And you're saying about forced power game, if you see how the NPC is, and that comes across as a power gamed NPC,
right,
then the players are going to do it that way because that's how they think it should be done.
That's the standard that's been established.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen campaigns kind of, and this goes back to just having power gaming brought on by paranoia. I've had GMs that for fear that a big villain is going to be too easy to defeat, they make a villain who mechanically is completely unbeatable, and then going up against that character becomes completely hopeless and pointless. I've also had a game where a player came to me to help them optimize their character, because they already knew that there was a power gamer in the group that had a heavily optimized character, and they wanted to be able to compete on some level, and were really worried about that one character dominating the game and making their contributions to it superfluous.
Right. Yeah, and in a sense, that's why we in our official games create the characters and hand them to the players. We'll say, if you want to play with us this weekend, we need a wizard. You can play a wizard. Here are 2 or 3 wizards you can choose from. So we do give some element of choice. But basically, every character, if you had to put it in point terms, is going to be pretty much co-equal. Some are going to do better in certain environments. Peleus, the cleric of Poseidon, he's going to do better in an aquatic environment. So some will do better in certain environments than others. But basically, everything is fairly well balanced, so no one has to feel that they've got a character that's defective.
Oh, and actually, and related to that, when I'm playing a game and I'm building a character, to enhance my own fun and make the character more flavorful, I will almost always include strategic areas of incompetence in that character.
Like from your book, Defect?
Like from the Jester Dragon's Guide to Defects, available from Skirmisher Publishing at DriveThruRPG.com.
Well,
yes,
characters have a defect too. Have at least one defect. Something that doesn't impede them all the time, but can impede them under certain circumstances, and that contributes to believability and role playing. So, and power gamers hate them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the funnest characters I ever played, he was a dwarf thief, and I intentionally made sure that he was terrible at stealth. He was great at picking locks, great at disarming traps, great at sneaking, great at hitting you on the back of the head to do horrible things to you. But when he was moving, he was always stomping around, and it was so fun to play that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is brilliant.
Yeah,
because like you say, if you get hired as a thief, and it's only partway through the adventure that they realise that it was a stealth mission that they got hired for. It's like, well, no, you didn't ask that. You just said, "Get me a thief." You know?
Right, right.
I can
And
imagine some great role-playing situations out of that.
exactly. Well, one of our archetypal characters. He's actually appears in a couple of our stories. He's in Swords of Coast Hecaton, the fiction anthology, but he's one of the characters that gets played a lot. It's Chauvelus the Ranger, and he has an animal companion. His defect is that he's allergic to animal hair. So it doesn't come up all the time. You know, his eyes are watering all the time. That doesn't have a game effect. But he's got to make a saving throw to avoid sneezing anytime he's sneaking up and listening at a door. I guarantee that's when his saber-toothed tiger's dander is going to start to make his nose run. So you know, I mean, that's a fun thing. It's not. I would never let something like that be lethal to the characters. You can't have a lethal defect, but it can really affect the way things happen in the context of a game. Things like that can be offset, but the fact that the characters have to do something to offset it, once again, that's adding an element of role-playing and believability.
And it's something I've often seen as a way that some GMs used. It's a kind of a sledgehammer tactic, but it is a sort of a stopgap solution to mitigate some of the problems of power gaming, of making it a requirement of character creation that you have to take a certain number of character flaws, quite possibly without getting bonus points for it, or you have to have at least one stat or skill that is significantly below average. And I don't think that's an elegant solution, and it's not a solution that always works, but I have played some great characters that were built using those strictures. I think it's something that, if implemented well, can be very enjoyable and can at least give the GM and the other players some slack to work around problems caused by power gaming.
Well, one of our most notorious power gamers, I think you've met him. He's a good friend of mine. He lives in Brazil now, so we don't get to game with him as much anymore. But it was my buddy Ho, and I think you met him at Gen Con. He used to come out to Gen Con with us. But we were rolling up characters for a new campaign, and that's back when I let people roll up their own characters. And he helped convince me why that was a bad idea. And I said, everybody's got to take a defect. So this was sometime after we introduced defects in our book Nuisances in 2004. So it's probably like 2005, 2006. And, you know, he sat down and he very seriously explained to me his character doesn't have any defects because he has a character concept. So the character concept that he's developed is one where his character doesn't have any defects. I said, okay, well, that's fine. I gave you the opportunity to pick a defect and to get an offsetting feat, so you'd get a bonus feat and you'd have a defect. But if you want to play it that way, then I'm just going to randomly roll for a defect for you, and you won't get an offsetting feat for it. Oh, okay. Well, let me just go ahead and do that. But that was his concept. His concept was that his character was overpowered and perfect. So I said, no, sorry, that's not a concept that we're going to allow.
No, that was the character's defect. He thought he was perfect.
Yeah, well, well, actually, we he inspired a defect. We actually have one named for him. You remember Ho's Disorder? Basically, it's a defect where if you give anybody else at the table advice during their turn, that counts as your action. So if somebody else's turn is going on and you're trying to tell them what they need to do, then it's assumed that your character was standing there barking orders at people instead of actually doing something. So he actually inspired so he tried to power game the whole session. So yeah, great guy. I love him. But he made a crappy Bloody Mary and was a notorious power gamer.
Well, I think we've had a pretty good discussion about power gaming. But before we sign off, let's just again go ahead and do our final thoughts. My own final thoughts. If you're gonna power game, do it for the right reasons. Do it because you find it fun, but also because no one else at the table is going to find it unfun. I don't think there's anything wrong with playing an optimized character, just so long as you're still giving everyone else a chance to shine in whatever way they prefer to shine around the table. Richard, as our special guest, why don't you give your final thoughts?
My final thoughts, or just my final thoughts?
We'll just do a final thought for now. We can do a final thought later.
About power gaming, it can be. You can comment on anything related to either power gaming or gaming in general.
Okay, well, I've got one on power gaming, so I'll do that one now. I forgot to put it in earlier on, actually. It's a visual example of power gaming. It actually comes from a film. If you've seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, there's this point, I believe the character's called Tucko. He goes into a gun store, and he gets out all the pistols, and they're all on the counter. There's like Smith & Wesson, there's a Colt, there's Remington, and he takes them all to pieces, and he's putting them and re-putting them together, and he's clicking them, and he's listening to them, and he's assembling them with the barrel from, say, a Smith & Wesson, and then the handle of a Colt, and something like that, and he puts it all together to make this absolutely fantastic gun, and it's an amazing gun. But it's ugly, and it completely lacks the spirit and soul. And that is what the same thing you're doing with power gaming. You're taking something from here, you're taking something from there, and all this works as well. And you're ramming them all together, but it doesn't have the soul. It's not the same.
It's good. It's a good illustration.
And how about you, Mike?
What is my final thought? Well, I've said everything I care to say about power gaming. I guess I would say to anyone who's listening to the show, check out the things that we're always talking about. Go to D-Infinity Online, which is d-infinity.net, because we've got new game content going up there every day. New essays going up every week on people's blogs about things related to gaming. So it is really a true interactive gaming magazine. People should feel free to comment on things. There's a lot of free good material. And check out all of our products that Skirmisher has. Skirmisher has more than 140 game products out now, and they're all available at DriveThruRPG. And we've now got them going on to Amazon as well, where people can order print copies of them. So take a look at some of the publications we're always talking about, because this is great stuff that we've put a lot of effort into over the years with an eye toward creating a quality, fun game product. So check out Will Thrasher's Jester Dragons Guide to Defects. Check out our Swords of Coast Fantasy campaign setting. And if you're into live-action role-playing games, check out our German edition of our horror scenario, Sight Unseen, when it comes out on Tuesday, because everything's scarier in German.
Indeed. So Mach Schnell to wherever that's to DriveThruRPG when that's available.
Tuesday.
All right, well, gentlemen, any other thoughts before we sign off for the week?
Yeah, I've got one. I've got to show Heath what the T-shirt I'm wearing. So if I stand up, I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, cool!
It doesn't.
The Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Yeah, it doesn't quite fit as well now. I'm going to Dragon Meet. Well, maybe it's me that doesn't fit. The T-shirt's all right. I'm going to Dragon Meet on Saturday.
T-shirt's perfect.
So I'm hoping to sort of meet Joe Diva and other people, Cubicle 7, that are bringing out the Lone Wolf Adventure game next year, in fact. In actual fact, there's a Kickstarter at the moment on Lone Wolf, the board game, by Megara Entertainment and Greywood. It features the artwork of Gary Chalk. It finished in about 15 hours' time. It is funded, but there is a free download scenario on there with here we go. There's some free minis. Can you see that you can cut out and play with?
Oh, cool!
There's things
you posted pictures of some of those.
I don't know if I have or not. And there's,
oh, nice.
No, that was mine. There's these maps as well. You can put them together in anywhere. I mean, that's free. That's free on there. So.
Oh, very nice.
Go on to Kickstarter and look up Lone Wolf the board game, and check it out.
Very nice.
And if you see me at Dragon Meet, come and say hi.
Yeah, and I am jealous. Dragon Meet and Essen are both two European conventions I would love to get to someday.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise.
All right, well, gentlemen, I think we've had a fantastic discussion on power gaming. Mike, thank you for hosting with me as always. Richard, thank you very much for joining us on the show. It was a pleasure to have you.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. Thank you ever so much.
Oh, excellent. And, well, this has been D Infinity Live, and we will see all of you next week.